Alright, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to Doctor and my fellow friends. So today I will present about the transportation sector that we face in a COVID-19 pandemic. So for the first article, I've been reviewed that the topic is about building back better the COVID-19 pandemic and transport policy implication for a developing megacity. So this article focus more on the Metro Manila, which is in the Philippines, where the policy have been made to ensure the public transportation in Philippines are well and being used by people. And for the second article, which is time lag effect of COVID-19 policy on transportation system, a cooperative study of New York City and Seattle, which is for the second article. This is focused more on the policy itself, where the author make research about policy like in transportation policy. As we know, COVID-19 is a new disease that need to be researched, so they have a time lag in amend a policy itself. So for the third article, they have the topic is about impact of interpersonal distancing on board trains during the COVID-19 emergency. So this article is more focused on Italy, where the author focus more about the distancing, the new norms that practice in public transportation that focus on the train. For introduction, the outbreak of the COVID-19 disease caused by a novel coronavirus has changed and will continue to change our world radically. First registered in December 2019 in Wuhan, China, the coronavirus has quickly spread across countries and territories. On March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization (WHO) declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. By the end of September 2020, at last 34.2 million cases were registered worldwide, while the total number of related deaths has exceeded 1 million, according to World Health Organization in 2020. Undoubtedly, the current pandemic has a significant impact on the everyday life. This relates to social norm, consumer behavior, habits, and custom. Or simply put, the COVID-19 outbreak has changed the way we live, behave, and interact. However, there are several studies highlight the role of the air transportation. Transport in the population is infection disease even a distant location. This study have been studied by the Bogart in 2018, and study have further identified an increased risk of disease infection, for example tuberculosis in public transport vehicle. So public transportation is a main role for we to curb the COVID-19 disease. So without proper policy, the COVID-19 will spread out more easily and effectively if we cannot curb the virus itself in transportation system. For article 1, data and method, the author used aggregate open source cell phone and GPS data from two sources that provide a comprehensive representation of the mobility behavior of the Metro Manila population before and during the lockdown. For the first open source cell phone, the author used a Google COVID-19 community mobility reports which provide anonymized and aggregate daily data on population location pattern during the COVID-19 crisis. For the second open source, the author used a Apple Mobility Trends report was used. The report was record change in routine requests since January 13, 2020 and thus describe a citizen intended trip patterns. It used anonymized data received from a random identifier based on the Apple Maps service and is grouped into a three modes category, which is driving, transit, and walking. For the first issue in Article 1, which is public transportation are not fully utilized in emergency situation in the COVID-19 in Metro Manila, Philippines. This is because emergency in Philippines prohibited the public to use public transportation is because to flatten the curve of the COVID-19. So in this case, we can see that population in the Philippines, in the Metro Manila itself, they more majority use a private car, and private car become a dominant mode of transport. This will lead to unsustainable development in the country. This issue are similar in Malaysia itself, where we can see in early PKP where government introduced lockdown where public transportation cannot use and people need to stay at home. The majority using the private car are dominant, so public transportation are not fully utilized. So with this method, it will lead to the undevelopment and loss of a government. Policy that we amend in Metro Manila, Philippines, which is promote active mobility and prioritize public transport in the short term, where when the shutdown of a public transport during emergency in Philippines, the subsequent limitation of capacity particularly hit household without a car, which corresponded to 88.5% of all households. So as a result, many of non-essential trips were avoided or could not be undertaken at all. So there was often no other choice for essential trip than walk or cycle, even for a large distance. Various news articles report or individuals in many cases had workers who had to travel countless kilometers and hours to get to work. Also, news articles have increasingly been reported a cyclist involved in a fatal accident without motorized vehicle. So we also can see the issue where the cyclists in Malaysia also have a accident with a car and motorcycle itself, where they have no special road for cyclists to use. They had to use a main road to travel using a bicycle. So this issue need to be catered in early stage to ensure no future accident will be occur. Second policy that we amend in Metro Manila, Philippines, which is provide adequate infrastructure and reform of public transport, which is this is a middle and long term solution in a public transportation. The short term win described above, however, the pointless if not convert into a long-term sustainable success. For long times, cycling in the Philippines was considered unviable, while infrastructure planning for active mobility has most commonly been absent due to the lack of regard for a holistic approach in urban transport planning. Therefore, it is important to leverage the current demand for active mobility and further promote safe and prioritize walking and cycling through the provision of adequate infrastructure. As we can see, Malaysia also has a developed new transportation system, which is IMBRT, Iskandar Malaysia Bus Rapid Transit in Johor Bahru. That consider a new technology, a new idea from Malaysia itself. As we can see in Milan, if I am not mistaken, they have a strategic public transportation that called tramway network, which is it can attract tourists and also the user of a public transportation to use it. In Malaysia, we also have a IMBRT. So with this method, we can attract the user and also the tourists to use the public transportation. More and less indirectly, it can help to develop public transportation in Malaysia. For recommendation in transportation sector policy, I recommend that for Malaysia, public transportation need to develop their time efficiency in arrival public transportation. This is because in Malaysia itself, we can see that transportation in KTM, especially in Kereta Api Tanah Melayu, there always been a delay and the time effectiveness in a station are not accurate. So in future, I hope that policy making can adjust the time efficiency and also develop the time efficiency. For example, in Malaysia also we have an application that we call bus kita, where the apps can detect the time arrival of a bus to arrive. So with this method, you can upgrade into the train station or KTM or LRT for the future improvisation. So this method can be catered at an early stage, because citizens not fully utilize public transportation because of a delay. So we can see with this method it can help public more satisfied and use public transportation satisfiedly, and also can assist developing in the country. So as a conclusion, public transportation is an important sector for public and also for the government, for the country to develop itself. For example, in Japan, the population in the Japan use a public transportation as their domain in traveler, and also in as a main transportation for them in using their daily use. In Malaysia, we can see a lot of population use their private car, their own transportation in traveling or their go to work. This we can see the differences between Japan culture and Malaysia culture, where they support their public transportation in the country. And also in Malaysia also we need to develop their application or their technology to be more advanced, such as Japan itself, to ensure the public and society are satisfied to use the public transportation itself. And also for the time lag policy, we can see that government also need to think efficiently, effectively, to ensure to cater all the issue and problem in the future which led by a transportation system. As we can see, there still have a lag between urban and also rural area in terms of transportation. So with this matter, I hope Malaysia government itself will take a drastic movement to ensure the gap between urban and area transportation sector are been taken over. That's all for me. Thank you, and Selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri. Mohon maaf zahir dan batin. Thank you.